Good morning. It's about 10 o'clock. This is Jason Dean. Jason Dean, YouTube, Film Fanatic, all things movies. So, hope everyone's doing good. I've been cranking out videos, been trying to keep up the momentum, and it's been, you know, I attribute the whole thing to having a little bit more of a flexible schedule these days. I have, typically I used to do all of these shows on like Saturdays. I did when I first started doing these videos, I was doing them on Saturdays. And I should say, originally when I first started diving into trying to do live videos, it was all through Facebook, and I was doing them on usually Saturday afternoons, and I would do basically kind of what I'm doing now, but they would be through Facebook Live videos. And Facebook Live video, the format is great in a lot of ways, which the most attractive part of it is, anybody out there probably already knows this on that's involved with Facebook to a degree, which is pretty much everybody. That if you're following somebody, you automatically get those notifications that something's going on, especially for when someone goes live. So you automatically get that audience, and you automatically get people chiming in. So it's really great as far as getting reaching people quick and in real time. And so I was doing that, and then I was really reluctant to do the video thing in the beginning because for a while, didn't really feel comfortable. Um, but in general, I don't really feel comfortable talking in front of groups of people. I know this format is very different, but still, lots of people do see the videos, and especially doing the live videos on Facebook. You get a bunch of people right away that will check out the video or comment or whatnot. And especially, I notice if you have like a guest, which I've done a couple times through Facebook, you get you get the person who you might be interviewing, you get their followers too. So when I did that show with Lydia Manson way back when, who's was a wonderful guest, and she's an actress in a lot of indie horror films. She's actually a pretty big deal in that whole circuit and that whole kind of environment. So there was hundreds of people that were checking out the video and commenting all at once, and so it's and on one part it's a little bit nerve wracking because you're given a microphone and you're in front of an audience, so you have to like kind of deliver the goods and try to make it coherent, your presentation and whatnot. But at the same time, you know, I realized, wow, these videos are a really great format to bringing more content to people and so forth. And at first, when I was doing those Facebook videos, I was doing them pretty much like maybe once or twice a month. I didn't want to oversaturate the whole environment, so I would do them once or twice a month. And then I started branching out with doing a couple of videos. I started doing like 2 or 3 videos a week. I do them on weekends, and then I do some on during the weeknights or weekdays. And was trying to kind of mix things up a little bit. I would do a group of videos that I had rented from Opera House Video. I would do shows on that, or specialty shows. So I was trying to mix up things and everything. But one of the things, and I did it for, I don't know, probably about 6 or 7 months, and it definitely helped the channel. It helped me realize, as somebody who's presenting content, what I need to learn, or what I was lacking in, and what maybe some of my strengths were. Just diving in and you're learning a new skill set, and so that aspect of it has been incredibly helpful. But one of the main reason that I kind of stopped doing the Facebook Live videos is really about the quality of the videos. I felt like, although they were pretty good, And I think some of the shows, as I was, looking back on some of those shows, I'm kind of proud of how they came out, and I feel like they're pretty cohesive and interesting. And some of them were really, really great, and kind of my development of this whole crazy thing that I do. So it was a real pivotal thing for me to venture into, but it really came down to the quality. I wasn't really happy with a lot of the audio and the video aspect of it, and I noticed that when I switched over, I've had an active YouTube channel for about a couple of years, but I never really uploaded any content to it. I just kind of, periodically I would get some video stuff from that was more centered on music stuff from my band Quantum, and I post that on there. Uh, and I automatically, and then the other, I had thought about trying to maybe do these videos on YouTube, but I had heard from other people that compared to say like Facebook and other things like that, it's a lot harder and more of a challenge to get people to basically like your page. Whereas Facebook, it seems like it's pretty easy to do. I remember a couple of years ago, there were a series of events that happened for the channel and the page, or the page on Facebook, where you could just readily send out invites, and you were able to garner interest, and people would like it, and it was had a high visibility to it, and it was relatively easy to to kind of get hits and to try to get that kind of attention with various things. Whereas, like, from what I gathered, YouTube was a lot harder because you're kind of in this big kind of void of a space. So it's mainly about the more you share your videos and the more that stuff is kind of visible, it will get more likes. But it was considerably a lot harder to do that with YouTube. And plus, with the YouTube thing, you're not automatically, like Facebook, where you're not automatically getting an audience that is going to be chiming in right away because of the way the format is set up, as far as people who like your page, or and they subscribe to it, like Facebook. They don't get those like instant notifications. But I tried it out a few times, and I was really happy with the quality of the video and the audio. I got this new microphone and a little bit of a better setup with my laptop, and my schedule changed. So I was like significantly happier as far as the quality goes. So I decided to go that way, and thankfully things have been growing slowly with the Jason Dean YouTube Film Fanatic page. So I decided to make that shift and that change to where from now on, for video stuff, I'm just going to use YouTube, because it's really, I like it because it's consolidated, and it's the quality is just better, and it's a little bit more professional and presentable. And moving forward, I'm trying to enhance that experience for people who check out this channel, and who like this page, and who like to listen to me ramble on about lots of weird movies and things like that. So yeah, I really appreciate that. So this movie that I'm going to be doing is a movie I've been wanting to see for so long. It's a movie that I knew about peripherally for years. It was always on the side. I always heard about it. I It's like one of those movies that's always come up, and it's The King of Comedy by Martin Scoresese. Who Martin Scoresese is, definitely one of the most iconic directors around today. He's always been one of my favorites. Martin Scorsese's, responsible for movies like Mean Streets, Casino, Goodfellas, um, Taxi Driver. So many great movies. So many great movies. Just an iconic director. And then he did his last full length feature that he did, which came out a couple of years ago now, called The Irishman. is, I think, uh, one of his best films. It's such an epic film, and I kind of feel like it was underrated to a degree. It got a lot of acclaim during the awards, that year, the Academy Awards, but I feel like it was pretty underrated. And it was also a movie I feel that was, well, it was actually the first time too. Martin Scorsese collaborated with Netflix, because it was he's a major name and one of the greatest filmmakers ever, and this was the first. The Irishman was the first one where first movie where it was com- entirely financed by Netflix. But so it had a very limited. It was in theaters for like a really brief time, but it mainly was its presence was made on stream in the streaming platforms on Netflix, and that's where it made its money. But just an incredible movie. Just and the whole thing is basically like a more or less a biopic about Jimmy Hoffa, but just an incredible movie. Such an incredible grand scale of things. Some of the best performances I think of Al Pacino and Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, even as they've gotten older. In that film, they really show when they dive into the whole acting thing again. They they're just unbelievable, like the best of their generation, and some of the best acting ever, some of the best actors ever. And it was really refreshing to see that movie. Um, I've always been a huge fan of those actors, but I think that one of the things that's happened, with, say, a good example I think is like Robert De Niro, who is a legendary, actor. Probably my favorite film of his would be like either Godfather 2 or the remake that Scorsese made of Cape Fear, which is just incredible. As great as the original is, I almost think that Cape Fear, the remake, is almost better. But Robert De Niro plays just an amazing actor. Raging Bull is another Scorsese film with De Niro, which is just an amazing film. So Scorsese has always been one of my favorite directors, and also Robert De Niro has always been that to me. Also, one of my favorite actors. But I think for many years he's done so many roles. I mean, over a span of like close to 50 years, it seemed he reached a point maybe a little bit in his career where he was taking on these roles where he basically was going to play the kind of the stereotypical Robert De Niro gangster personality, and he basically would play the same guy. He would be hired to work in these various movies, these different action movies and crime movies, where he basically played you know himself. So he kind of became a character of himself, as opposed to like when you see roles like Taxi Driver, or you see Mean Streets or Goodfellas, where he really is like legitimately an actor in these films. Even movies like The Mission, which is another amazing De Niro role where he completely transforms himself. And he's had those roles throughout his career, but I felt like he kind of got in this weird niche of where he was just becoming a parody of himself. Same thing I feel like that happened with Al Pacino. At one point, one of the greatest actors of his generation, up there with like Marlon Brando or or what have you. But the same kind of thing where Al Pacino played some just amazing roles, like Dog Day Afternoon or Serpico, The Godfather, my favorite movie of all time. Just iconic. But then he kind of got in that same thing where he started doing a whole bunch of movies for many years. And again, his career is, spans probably like a 50-year, time span. But he basically started falling into this thing too, where he just basically played the same character of himself. And I think it's a thing of where maybe it becomes like a paycheck or a scenario of where it becomes punching in, punching out for some of these actors that they're getting paid lots of money, so they just kind of say yes to these roles to kind of come in and basically play themselves, and not really, the material is not necessarily that strong or well written. So they kind of just go on this automatic kind of pilot mode of where they get hired to do all of these spots and work that doesn't really have any maybe significance or doesn't really have any depth to it. But getting back to Irishman, I felt like watching that it really showed these guys that how just amazing they were and that they are as actors when they really dive into a role and transform themselves and they become unrecognizable. How just incredible they are, and how much depth they have as actors. So that was one thing I was really blown away by watching the King of Comedy. And Robert De Niro's role is, I think, one of the best roles I've ever seen him do. I've never seen this movie, and I kick myself for not seeing it before. But just amazing, just like, I mean, some of the best acting ever. But before I get into this movie, uh, the funny thing about how I actually kind of got my interest going, what sparked my interest into actually seeing this movie, The King of Comedy. Again, like I said, huge Scorsese fan. I love all of his films. Um, my favorite Scorsese movie is probably Mean Streets, which was like his first movie with Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. Just an amazing movie. It's so gritty. It's so raw. It feels like almost like a documentary, but it's just such a low down and kind of dirty film. And Taxi Driver would be another one. But just amazing films. And so a few years back, there was the Joker movie that came out. I think it came out in 2019. That the Joker movie that starred Joaquin Phoenix, and it was directed by Todd Phillips, another great director. And it starred Joaquin Phoenix playing the iconic villain, the Joker. And it's an amazing movie. It really is. I think it's easily. I remember seeing it in the theater, and I was just totally blown away by it, by the experience, and uh, just how raw it was and unsettling, and how dark it was. It was incredibly dark, and I just felt like, as much, I mean, the Joker, as far as like superheroes go, my I'm a big fan of a lot of the Marvel movies, and I do like some of the DC characters and some of the films, but I always have leaned more towards the the Marvel universe. I feel like, or as a whole, they've been stronger and more consistent. There's so many, so there are some films in the whole franchise that are not so great, but as a whole, I feel like it's pretty strong. Whereas DC has suffered some pretty big hits. I think the exception is, well, the Joker for one. Even though it's a very different kind of a film, uh, I think it's just an amazing film. And also, I really am a big fan of Zack Snyder's director's cut of the Justice League, which I think is a pretty amazing movie, and I think it's easily, I think, the best movie he's done. And then huge fan of the Robert Patterson Batman that came out this year, which I feel is my favorite Batman film, which is, I know is hard to say, but I feel like it's overall my favorite of the entire franchise and the whole Batman mythology. Um, so, you know, I've always been a huge fan of, well, my favorite character of all time in, as far as superheroes go, is the Batman. And my favorite villain of all time has always been the Joker. And obviously, the Christopher Nolan movies are tremendous. They're amazing. So it's kind of hard to always to take that position, saying that the newer one is my favorite. But overall, I think, because those movies are so great, particularly Batman Begins for Christopher Nolan and The Dark Knight, especially The Dark Knight. Um, I those movies are pretty untouchable in a lot of ways. But overall, I feel like the the one that came out this year with Robert Patterson, it's just something about it that really captures everything that I feel as Batman. But and obviously, The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger, one of the the greatest roles ever, and one of the greatest portrayals of the Joker ever. But I felt like with the Todd Phillips film, they really did something different. They weren't trying to make it into that. They weren't trying to retell that story. Or they weren't trying to portray the Joker that way. They were looking at it more from a, kind of this idea of to a degree about mental illness. So it was a really interesting perspective, and they really dove into kind of the psychology of what made the Joker, and just amazing. But I remember seeing it in theater, and I've seen it a few times since then. I don't own it yet. I'm gonna eventually buy it because I think it's an amazing film. I so I remember renting the Blu-ray of the Joker, a year or so after it had come out, and I loved it even more. And there was a special features interview on there, which was very cool, and it was interviews with Todd Phillips, and actually Robert De Niro is actually in the Joker, and he plays basically like like a talk show host who's like a very famous kind of celebrity, and he's amazing in it. He's I think again it's like De Niro stepping up to the plate and being a real actor again, and you really see that he's just magnificent when he does that. And he's got a really interesting kind of different role. It's more of a supporting cast um, role, but it's so great. He's he and his chemistry between him and Juan Phoenix is just really just outstanding. But when I was watching a special features show thing on the disc of the Blu-ray of the Joker, they were Todd Phillips was talking about, because the other thing too with the connection with Scorsese is that Scorsese produced the Joker, and when I remember watching the film, to me it very much reminded me of, it had the Scorsese feel. It was very raw. It had this real edginess to it, and it felt like, even though it was a big budget film, it felt kind of like an indie film. It just had this grit to it, and it reminded me of like a Scorsese kind of film. And he produced it. When I found that out afterwards, I was like, oh wow, very interesting. But it had this Scorsese vibe, particularly like the early old school Scorsese films of like, say, Raging Bull, or more so like Mean Streets. It just had this grit to it. So I was watching the special features about the Joker, and Todd Phillips, the director, was talking about how, he was obviously excited to get Scorsese involved with the film, but he also said that how much Scorsese had an influence on the film. And Todd Phillips was talking a lot about this film called The King of Comedy, which he felt was like the biggest source of inspiration for the Joker. And I was like, wow, like, and that's when I realized, like, that's the only movie of Scorsese's career I've never seen. And I'm like, why haven't I seen this? And it also, it was a few years, I believe it came out a few years after Taxi Driver. So De Niro was still pretty young and fresh, um and I'm like, wow, why have I not seen this film? And so I was like, I got to see this. And then for some reason I never did. But after seeing that special features, that's why I was like, I need to see this film. And then I remember going to Opera House Video, like the video shop I go to in Belfast, and I had asked to see, because Scorsese is a real popular director, and they have pretty much all of his films there. But the one movie that they didn't have was The King of Comedy. So that was really surprising. So, and I didn't get a chance to see it anywhere else. I don't really stream anything. I, I do buy movies that I haven't seen, which I've been doing a lot of shows on those kinds of things. But, so But just recently, the King of Comedy Opera House Video got a copy of it. They actually bought it, so I rented it last night, and it came out in 1983. It was directed by Martin Scoresese, and the whole premise of the story is Rupert Pumpkin, who is played by Robert De Niro, is a failure in life but a celebrity in his own mind, hosting an imaginary talk show in his mother's basement. When he meets the actual talk show host, Jerry Langford, Jerry Lewis, he's convinced it will provide his big break. But Langford isn't really interested in Pumpkin at all. And this also stars Jerry Lewis, who actually plays this TV show host, who's basically kind of like a Johnny Carson, Ed Sullivan kind of figure, and he basically he's a comedian, but he hosts this variety show, and it's like the biggest thing on television, and I was blown away by this. The King of Comedy is a tremendous movie, and it really is a kind of a deep dive in kind of the psychology of somebody who becomes this kind of crazed, obsessed fan who completely lives in this dark, delusional world, and can't see outside of that once they're in the trenches. And De Niro, like I said, it's one of Robert De Niro's. It's easily one of his best performances that I've ever seen, and it's so well done. Jerry Lewis is just amazing because Jerry Lewis, an iconic actor comedian from like the '60s and '50s. He was older when he made this film, but he plays like it really straight. He's not funny in this film, and he is, you know, struggling with his relationship with Robert De Niro's character, especially when things kind of develop and get considerably darker. But there's a real interesting chemistry where he's open to listening to him after he like has these encounters, and but he plays a really straight laced kind of actor, and just an amazingly dramatic role that's really great. And I was really blown away. I had no idea that Jerry Lewis was that great of an actor. He's you know, known for being like an icon in comedy. So it was really interesting to see him make this, do this whole create this whole other persona. But just a tremendous film. I was just blown away by it, and I think it's easily one of the greatest Scorsese movies, and I think it's one of the most overlooked or underrated of his films. It came out in 1982, and I just saw it for the first time last night. But just a tremendous film, and it really there's similarities between it with Taxi Driver because it takes place in New York City in the 80s, so you really get this sense that you're there. And it was, as far as I know, this movie was filmed in New York City during that time, but it just has that grit to it. It captures the whole city and the whole aesthetic of New York at that time, where New York was a little bit dirtier and had this real seedy element back in the time of like when 42nd Street was a thing. Getting back to all the other films I do back in the time of the grindhouse cinema and the pornography that was rampant. So, but this film does such an amazing role with capturing that whole aesthetic, and you feel like you're there in New York. So it's got this real, you know, quality. You feel like you're kind of wearing it, and you can kind of smell it. But the thing that I was so blown away by with this film, and in some ways it had a weird effect where I was like, I kind of had a WTF moment. Like in the beginning of this show, I mentioned the way I got reintroduced to this film, or reintroduced to trying to seek the King of Comedy out, was through the Joker. And like I had said, I'd watched a special features show, and the director Todd Phillips was saying how the King of Comedy, Scorsese overall was a huge influence on the way he wanted to try to make this film, and also Scorsese produced the film. But he was talking heavily. Todd Phillips was talking heavily about the King of Comedy, where he really used that as a reference for the Joker. And after I about the King of Comedy is just under 2 hours, and about an hour and 40 minutes or hour and 20 minutes into the film, I remember watching it. I was just totally into it and totally engaged, and just couldn't wait to see what was going to happen next. But I remember pausing the film, and I was like, "This is crazy! Like the Joker is literally this is literally the Joker, like shot by shot, like not just an influence, but I felt like this movie is the Joker, like literally on almost every scale and detail. Where part of that film and part of the idea with the King of Comedy is that Robert De Niro's character is this obsessed fan, but he's completely delusional, and he's imagining all of these great things happening to him because he's incredibly deranged. But he's imagining himself getting married and having this acceptance and all of this success and all of these things. And there's a lot of times in the film where you're not sure what is real and what's not, and or if he's totally delusional. And then by the time you get further into it, you realize that this man is like completely psychotic. And that's exactly what the Joker is. And I had a weird reaction, I and like I said before, the director Todd Phillips was talking about the King of Comedy as being a really big influence on the film, and that was like a source of inspiration for the direction of how they were going to tell this new narrative of the Joker. And I thought, okay, but this is next level. Like they're literally copying. It's like literally the same story, and it gave me a weird taste in my mouth about how I thought about the Joker. That was my first reaction. Whereas, like when I first saw the Joker, you know, obviously before I saw the King of Comedy, I thought it was very original. I thought it was really fresh and gritty and just raw and super dark and just totally original. And just amazing acting across the boards and just amazing direction. Um, and when he was talking, was Todd Phillips was saying that he was basically using this as a reference point. Uh, After seeing The King of Comedy, which came out in 1982, almost, I don't know, 35, 40 years before The Joker, I'm like, no, like, The Joker wasn't original in any way, shape, or form. They literally just took the whole narrative of the setup and the plot of the film and switched out Robert De Niro's character for Joaquin Phoenix's character as the Joker. So I felt this feeling of, or at least my enthusiasm for the Joker as being this totally original movie and kind of an innovative movie and a standalone, and definitely a standalone film. I felt like it diminished my love of that film by watching it, just because it was, to a degree, a literal, like, it literally ripped off the King of Comedy, like in every way, shape, or form. And I can understand, like, it's great when films have big influences on other films or other directors, because, I mean, we're all products of who we love and who we're influenced by. Like one example is The Witch, which I've talked about, Robert Eggers, and that movie was very much influenced by The Shining. Um, as far as the pacing goes and the way the narrative and the slow burn kind of aspects to The Shining was very much an influence on The Witch, I feel. And Robert Eggers has like talked about that a lot when he made that film. But Robert Eggers made his own unique film. It's not a ripoff of The Shining. It's not a carbon copy of The Shining. It's like you could see that there's like a tip of the hat to that classic film that was meant so much to him. But he did something different and created his own vision around it. So you can't really say it's its own thing, you know. And it's great. I think it's great when you can see art or music when it's reflected in that person's work or their an influence. But a lot of the times, like, you know, you can see their own uh, imprint or footprint on their work, and it has their own style. Like for me, for instance, for music, get just slightly getting off topic, but related to the same thing. For me, like with music, like I have a lot of music friends that, especially the last 10 years or so, a lot like friends that are also writing a lot of music, are writing their own original material and have their own projects and their own bands, and everybody's kind of got their own mode of like kind of operation, and whatnot. And sometimes you can hear a song that maybe somebody writes, and you're like, oh, that kind of reminds me of so and so, or this has this kind of feel, and it's like, but yet it's kind of got this own. It goes into a different direction, and then sometimes people will kind of copy something, and it's kind of the same. They're using the same blueprint. So everybody's got their own different kind of method and way of how they process when they're creating their own art. But I remember I used to play with this one musician a few years ago, and we used to talk about that a lot. And she used to write all of her own original material, and it wasn't really a thing for her band to do like covers. And she always focused on writing her own material. And she said that when she would, she had a lot of, obviously lots of influences, and she would listen to a lot of music and bands that she loved. But when it came to the actual writing process of her material, she would like basically close off everything that she was listening to. She would go through this phase of when she was actually writing or composing material, she wouldn't really listen to anything and just kind of get caught up in her own space and just do that. And I always thought that was interesting. But for me, I noticed like as many movies as I watch and as much music as I listen to, I notice for me when I'm in that process of writing music, it almost intensifies my appetite for checking out more music and checking out more movies. I feel like it just, because I'm inspired by so many things, it just kind of opens up those gates even more. And, occasionally it happens for me where the music that I write for Quantum, some people will, will say, oh, this kind of reminds me of this band or this writer or this group or that blah blah blah. And I love that. I love if somebody, has some feedback and they can hear maybe an influence of something that I really love in the music. That really means a lot to me. And hopefully it's not like a ripoff, but like obviously a tipping, like a tip of the hat to the people that I really love and look up to. And I always feel like that's a great feeling. I remember that happened to me a few years back where, you know, one of my favorite artists of all time is Herbie Hancock, and particularly the Headhunters. And one of my favorite albums of all time is Thrust, with Mike Clark on drums and Paul Jackson. And it's during that time when Herbie Hancock was really diving into using all kinds of synths and experimenting with all kinds of new technology. And that's like my favorite music pretty much. And I I've gone through these periods where like that's all I listen to, and I've tried to learn a lot of that material, and it's this constant source of inspiration. And being that I do mostly electronic music, I feel like that stuff has a real big influence on a lot of modern electronic music. At least I do, because of the the use of the technology that he was using, and it was really ahead of its time, and it has that kind of aesthetic behind it. So when somebody had said that to me, I know it will never be as funky and as good as Herbie, but when somebody said that to me, that they heard that, I was like, oh, that felt really good. Um, but so bringing it back to the King of Comedy, I was just an amazing movie. But I was so blown away by the how I felt the Joker was literally a carbon copy of the King of Comedy. If you literally took De Niro's character and switched it out with Joaquin Phoenix playing the Joker, you would have the same movie. And the other thing, if you took De Niro's character, who he plays in The King of Comedy, switched it out with Jerry Lewis, and he plays the same character in that film, in The Joker, a talk show host, or an entertainment TV show host. It's literally the same person, the same role. So it was just like, wow, like that's not just the tip of a hat, or that's not an obvious influence or something that inspired the film, or you can see traces of it, or you can kind of get that vibe from it. This was like at a different level. Like I feel like this was literally a carbon copy. That was my first reaction. So it was really interesting. And I don't think like I still think the Joker's a great movie and amazing, but I kind of felt like it let the air out of the balloon a little bit for me as far as regarding it as being this totally fresh and innovative movie. Yeah, strange. But anyway, this is Jason Dean, so if you get a chance, like and subscribe to my page, and definitely check out The King of Comedy by Martin Scoresese. It's an amazing movie. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. Peace.